Hey guys, so in the last video we saw how to make a simple counter using React Native. So this video is about we'll be creating a new application which will be a to-do application where we'll be saving the task which a user wants to perform and just wants to capture, and we'll be trying to understand more of what is there in React Native. So let's just get started. As you can see, I have a new React Native project created and I have cleaned up all the boilerplate code and directly jumped into the app.tsx. So let's start discussing on what do we need to make a to-do application. So in order to make a to-do application, the thing which we need is we need a way that user can come and write or note down their to-do, and user should also have a button. On click of that button, the user should be able to store that to-do, and the to-do which gets stored should be shown on the screen as well, right? So these are the three things which we'll try to achieve. So let's get started. So the first and the foremost thing, as I mentioned, we need a way so that user can come and start typing and they can store their to do, right? So in order to do that, we need a component called as text input. So if we type text input, you can see that it got imported from React Native, and the text input component is present in our JSX. Now the moment we save, even though we don't see anything on the UI, but if I click, you can see that when I clicked on this empty place, the cursor started blinking and the keyboard popped up. Now, if you have seen any kind of keyboard, any kind of text input in any of the websites, there is a thing called as placeholder. So the placeholder basically describes what kind of text input it is. So similarly, we have a prop called as placeholder, and if we say enter to do, let's call it enter task, you can immediately see that okay, user can now see that okay, that the placeholder is enter task. Now when we click on it, we can start typing. The moment we start typing, the placeholder hides, and the moment we don't have anything, the text input is empty, the placeholder automatically pops up. So this essentially allows users to understand okay, what this text input is about, right? Now the second important thing in text input is a prop called as value. So value is basically a prop which expects a string, right? So let's say if I just give it my name, so you can immediately see okay, now this text input has the name Ritunjay, but if I try to edit it, I cannot edit it. The reason is what I'm saying by passing the value to this prop value, that the value of this text input will be equal to whatever you're trying to pass to the prop value, right? So there are a lot of values, don't get confused. All I'm trying to say is that the text input has a prop value, and whatever the value is will be shown in the text input, but we don't want it to be a hard-coded value, right? So what we'll do is let's create a state called as possible task, and we'll also have a setter function set possible task, and we'll be like okay, it's a state, so we are going to use state hook, and we are just going to pass an empty string. Right now what we'll say is the value of this particular text input is possible task. Now if we save it, if we click it, even though I'm trying to give some input, it's still not registering it. The reason is the value of this text input is possible task, and possible task is an empty string. So even though I'm trying to give some input, it's still not capturing. The way to capture the input is we have one more prop called as on change text. Now this particular prop expects a callback function which essentially receives an argument that is a string, as you can see here, right? So it expects a callback function, and the argument the callback function will be receiving is of type string, which they have referred as text. So let's create the same, and let's call our argument as text as well, right? Now what we want is that this particular prop on chain text, it ensures that whatever is passed as the callback will be executed whenever there is a keystroke whenever user gives any input, right? If the user clicks R, or if the user clicks G, this particular callback will be executed. So what we want to do right now, that whenever this callback gets executed, we want to update our set possible task with whatever the value is, which is text. Now if we save this, you can immediately see that now we are able to enter bunch of values, right? So that's awesome. Now the next thing which we need is a button, right? So if you again write button, you can see that button got imported from React Native. Even button is a component provided by React Native, and you can immediately see it says there's an error. The error is that it needs a mandatory prop called as title. So let's define title, and what this title is you will get to know immediately. So the moment I save and the title is submit, you can see that a button popped up and the title of button is obviously submit. Now, as discussed in the previous video where we made a counter, the text component has a prop called as onPress, and that prop expects an callback function, and that callback function is executed whenever that text gets pressed. Similarly, we have the same prop that is onPress in the button component as well. So let's see that, and we'll add a console statement. Now if we click on this button, we should be able to see first getting logged, right? So what we can do is, whenever user enters some task, okay, this cannot be task, the task is buy food, right? So this can be task. So what we want to do is, whenever user enters something and whenever user presses this button submit, we should store that particular task, right? That is the to do of the user. So in order to store that and also show it on the UI on the screen, we need to have one more state, and this we'll call as task. Let's call it all, okay, let's keep it task, right? And we'll be like, okay, we'll also have a set task, and it will be use state, and it will be an empty array. Okay, awesome. So now what we want is, whenever the user presses the submit button, we want to store the possible task in task. The way we are going to do is, we are going to call set task, the setter function of the task state, and we want to store possible task, but also we want to persist or keep the previous task, right? Because you don't want that user enters one particular task and all the previous tasks just vanishes. So what we can do is, we can spread the task. So basically we are taking all the task which was previously present, and we will append possible task. Now we see an error, we can get rid of that error, no worries. We will come back to this error and address it. Now what is happening when we enter something and when we click on this button, the task array, the task state essentially gets updated. And how it gets updated is, we call this set task setter function of the task, and what we are doing is, we are spreading all the previous tasks, and then we are appending the possible task, right? Okay, now if we do this, and if we say to do one, or rather let's call it task one, and if I click on submit, okay, things happen, but we cannot see, right? And obviously we cannot see, right? Because all the tasks, all the to do items are getting stored where? It's getting stored in the task array, right? So we have to render all the items of this task array, right? So the way we have to do it, we have to basically perform a map operation. So if you have already worked with map, you'll be very much familiar. If not, still bear with me, because it's something that may look very difficult initially, but it's a very straightforward and a simple thing. So map is basically a function which all the array will be getting, right? So any array in JavaScript will by default get a function called as map. Now what is map? Map basically is a way to iterate over elements of an array, and once we iterate we can return some value, right? So basically we can transform our array. So how we are going to transform is that task array is basically a array where all the tasks are stored, but the way we have to show it here, and which I mentioned in the previous video also, that in React Native, if you want to show some kind of text, the text has to be wrapped inside a text component. So what we'll do, if you look at this map basically expects a callback function, and that callback function will receive three arguments. First is value, second is index, third is the array, right? And value is basically the individual elements of the array. So let's try to see. We'll call the value as current task, and then we'll have the index as current index. Now what we want to return is, we want to return current task, but if we just do that, you can immediately see that there is an error. The reason being, current task is a string, and we can just not render string directly. We need to wrap it in a text component. So if we wrap it in a text component and we'll access this variable, you can immediately see that now if I add task 1 and click submit, you can see task 1. If I have task 2, if I click, you can see task 2 as well, right? Okay, now the question is, why do I need this current index, right? The reason I need current index is, let me demonstrate with some code snippet, right? So now this task is having two elements, right? That is task 1 and task 2, right? This task array is having task 1 and task 2. So how it is looking under the hood, what this map is essentially doing, this is iterating two times, and two times it is returning text, right? And text component, and each text component will be having the current task. So how this is looking is something like, one second, task 1, task 2. So this is what exactly we are seeing here, right? Now the thing is, even though this is looking different to us, but whenever we try to render a list, right, or whenever we try to render an array, so we are essentially returning the same component, right? In our case, it's a text component. Now React doesn't understand if this text component is different from this text component. This may not be very much necessary right now to understand why this is important, but yeah, we have to remember that in future a lot of optimization issues starts happening when React is not able to distinguish between if this particular component is different from this particular component. So what we can do is, every component in React gets a prop called as key. This key basically has to be a unique identifier, so that React can know, okay, that this component is different from the other component. So the thing which we have unique when we try to iterate over any array is the index. An index of an element cannot be same as of a different element, right? Two elements in array can never have same index, right? So index is definitely the unique thing, so we will pass this as the key. Now what is going to happen is, for the first element the key will be 0, and the second element the key will be 1. And obviously you guys must be knowing that indexing starts with 0, right? So that's why for the first element it will be 0, for the second element it will be 1, right? Now React will immediately know, okay, that this text element is different from this text element and text component, or for that matter, right? And what is going to happen is that React will be better able to optimize the application, right? So yeah, now since we have this key, right, and key is different, right? So this is how it's going to look. For the first component, for that first text component, the key is 0. For the second text component, the key is 1, right? The reason being because we are using a current index, and index starts from 0. So for the first component it's 0, for the second it's 1, right? And Since these keys are now different, React will immediately know that this text component is different from this text component. So this will have more significance once we start writing complex application, because these things are very much important to have a nice and a fast performance application, right? We need an optimized application. So you can just consider this thing, that putting a key whenever you're trying to render an array will be a very good practice to start with, because eventually you won't run into some stupid optimization problem which arises because of the key, right? So again, now coming back, what we have successfully achieved is that user can come and enter a task, right? And user can click on the submit button, and the same thing will be reflected here, right? Now, again, coming back to the error which we got earlier. Now the error, if you hover over it, right, what it says, the type string is not assignable to type never, right? So the reason is, if you see the type of possible task, the type of possible task is a string, because we initially declared, right? We initially initialized with an empty string, right? So it's a string. But the problem is, if you hover over the task type is for sure an array, but it doesn't know what type of array it is. Whether it's a string array or it's a number array, it doesn't have any idea, right? So what we can do is, we can define the type of the state, and the way we do it, we use these arithmetic symbols, that is greater than less than symbol, and inside that we can say string, and then we'll put an array. So now immediately React starts recognizing, okay, task is an array of type string. Now what we are trying to perform, that okay, we are spreading task and we are trying to append a string, right? So obviously you can append a string in a string array. So now this error goes away, right? So this is how we are able to achieve a basic to-do application where user can come and store the task. Thank you guys. We'll be discussing more on the other aspects and other things which we can do with this particular application. So yeah, let's catch up. Thank you.